auto sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. You're listening to Wayne Moody and Mark Lerner.
Welcome, everyone, to our second Out of Bounds official recording. Please, everyone, if you can, go to our original one, which was in GPS Astrology, our initial magazine that came out at the August 11th full moon of Leo and Aquarius. And thanks to Katja Juliet Lerner, managing editor of GPS Astrology and all-around wizard queen, we are now also on YouTube, and that's where you can listen to all of this. And within GPS Astrology, because we're on something called Flip Snatch, you can also click on what you see in GPS Astrology in this area of Out of Bounds and jump in and start listening. Okay, so in the first, one of the things that I want everyone to know is we will start putting charts up. And Wayne and I have just created a name for this. It'll be called the Astro Scoreboard. Because, and I should remind everyone, you can listen to the first one, and we did a great introduction there, but just to remind anybody who's just starting to listen to number 2 here and you haven't listened to number 1, Brother Wayne, Moody, and I have been doing these conversations between California and Oregon for a couple of years, but they were never recorded. And then we got the idea to create Out of Bounds, two guys talking sports and astrology. We came up with that name. And then, due to the circumstances of creating GPS Astrology and having that vision of almost over a year ago, now through Katja and the dynamics of the media and everything else, we are now able to do Out of Bounds. This is our second recording, officially. However, since the first one, and you can testify to this, Wayne, how many dozens of times have we been talking unrecorded between August 11th and today? Just so everybody knows, we're on August 4th of 2022, and it's a little bit after, it's about 4:25 that we started doing this particular recording in the afternoon Pacific time. And I did want to tell everybody that we actually decided to time this to get the maximum benefit of the power of astrology now. The planet Mars, which we'll get into probably at some point, at least in a footnote, which will go retrograde the day before Halloween, October 30th, and have a 76-day retrograde to January 12th. Mars today is exactly, almost precisely at this moment, because we waited for this, has returned to where it was when the United States was born at the Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Wayne and I have been working with this chart, a very timed chart, which we'll bring up again at some point, and we brought up last time, based on research by our associate Barry Lyons many years ago, and the work of Dane Rudger before that, and other people. So for today, we a couple of days ago, we were thinking, when should we do this? And we looked ahead and thought, well, the moon will be in Aquarius. That's also the moon in the U.S. chart. Wayne has the moon in Aquarius. I have Venus in Aquarius, and we thought, hey, late afternoon, October 4th. By the way, to throw one other factoid out, as I was saying to Wayne a few minutes ago, unrecorded, today is the 65th anniversary of Sputnik going up. So talk about GPS Astrology, Out of Bounds, all this technology. 65 years ago, the world was shocked to hear the sounds of Sputnik, and then the next day, October 5, this is in all the newspapers in America, to suddenly catch up with the Russians. Okay, so a couple other things. So we're doing this for the second time in terms of recording, and one other thing I wanted to say was, remember the last time when I did the introduction, and this time is going to be different. Wayne is going to bring up about a dozen points, and we're going to go back and forth about some of the key charts and people that we've been looking over recently. And there's so many of these things, we had to sort of limit it to a certain number. But what I wanted to just say one more little thing here. One of the things that we have been looking at, which is so exciting, are what we call parallels of declination. And in astrology, almost all of us are kind of hooked into what we call the zodiac, which are the 12 signs of the zodiac. And that's what we call the ecliptic, which is what we see as the apparent sun's path in the heavens. Whereas we know the reality is the Earth is revolving around the sun in terms of reality. We've learned that through Copernicus, Galileo, and so many different people in the last 400 plus years. Nevertheless, because the Earth is spinning and has a particular tilt of 23 plus degrees, we have the 12 signs of the zodiac. We have, as if many of you know, we all have different rising signs depending on where we're born, how far north or south we are from the equator. We can have any of the 12 signs rising. The sun is going to be obviously what most of us know, but then we have to calculate the moon, the 8 planets, asteroids, Chiron, all these other things. And what most people are familiar with astrology are what we call the zodiacal positions and or the house positions in a horoscope. But what Brother Wayne and I have been doing, and he has done this work for decades, the longitude directions, in other words, where are, I should say the latitude directions, north and south of the celestial equator. So we have the equatorial zone, but the way we see it is that there's a celestial equator. And parallels of declination have been around for as long as the zodiacal ones, but they don't have the kind of imagery like the Aries the ram, or Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins, and so on, because when we deal with declinations, which is the whole concept of are planets within the bounds of how far the sun moves north or south during the course of the year, are they out of bounds? And Brother Wayne will be talking more about what that concept is all about. I just wanted people to know a lot of the research we have been doing, which is so exciting because it hasn't been really grounded in astrology enough, is the vertical dimension of planets moving north and south. And I've had that in the cosmic calendar for a long time, for the last 41 years, the Astrology Cosmic Calendar, which is an app. I do discuss when major planets are parallel one another or they're contraparallel north and south. So, look, there were other things I was going to say at the beginning, but I've already talked for a couple of minutes here. So, Wayne, you take it away. Let's do point one. And if anything I said is not clear or something, please, give that out. We can correct it.
Well, thank you, Mark. I guess I'm the lead-off batter, right?
You're leading off.
I'm leading off. Well, since August, we've had a tsunami of ideas and events happen in the world that we all share in common, under the sky that we all share in common. And it's been very hard to pick and choose amongst them. So Mark has asked me to formulate a short list as the leadoff batter, and I've chosen, he said a dozen, I've chosen 13, in New Orleans. If you go to a good grocer, they're going to give you that extra in the bag. So I'm bringing 13 to the table today. And my first one, since this is a sports-minded endeavor that we're doing today, out of bounds, outrageous events, here's the first one. The prominence of American Samoan athletes in the U.S. sports and military cultures. And it's been spotlighted by the recent misfortune of a fantastic phenom quarterback for the Miami Dolphins named Tua Tagovailoa. He, before millions and millions of people's eyes, he was concussed, not in one game, 2 games, and it stirred up huge controversy of whether or not enough care and attention is given to these professional athletes who are on a field, on a gladiator field where they can easily be killed. So, Mark, what do you have to say about this?
Well, yeah, when we talked about it the other day, and just as a little insight, we two guys, Wayne played professional. Football as a center. I can say that, right?
No, college.
Yeah, what I mean is, I should have said. To me, compared to what I experienced more like in the streets of New York City and playing stickball, that is professional. But I realize it's in college. Okay, but the point is that we both watched different games. We experienced this. We not just football, even though some of the imagery that Koch has created uses the football, but whether it's basketball, baseball, the plight of that particular player, and again, seeing some of those highlights again of him, I didn't watch it too many times, but him wobbling around, and then as Wayne has just said, this is a big deal because you tend to think that the NFL, as this big corporate entity, supposedly is trying to protect all the players. And I know we have 12 other points to talk about, but what comes to mind? Who was the player for Oakland? We go back, we found out he was a guard. He was having to take a lot of drugs, in order to cope with all of his pain. And of course, we've had this with baseball, with what is legal and what isn't legal. This whole issue of it's different with football, with the injuries in particular. Look, basketball players, hockey players, soccer players, baseball players, every single sport. But in terms of football, where, every starting point, you're crashing bodies with one another, the fact that they were able to let this player and continue to play, like you said, it was creating outrage by players, by observers, by everybody, because, what it comes down to is like, as well as I do, we all hate the fact, and I'll just be brief here, we hate all we're going to do a replay, and everybody's waiting around. Can you just, get on with the game? But when a player gets injured, and that you see them on the field, everything stops, and it's almost like sometimes when it's really a bad injury, then the players are even praying. They take off their helmets. They all stand around and stop the game. And in this case, it's like, are you going to let this wonderful player, tell me if I'm wrong, he played for Alabama. He was their quarterback. He throws left-handed as well, which is not, there were more right-handed quarterbacks, right? Am I correct on that?
Yeah, he was born right-handed, and his father taught him to throw the ball left-handed, Mark.
Well, that'll bring up another thing for another time of my favorite.
He's the only left-handed. He's the only left-hander throwing in the NFL. The only one.
Well, look, I remember you bring up Zorn for Seattle was a left-hander. The player that got into trouble for dog racing was a left-hander for Atlanta. Remember that?
Yes. Yes.
I'm just remembering.
Michael Vick.
Well, and let's remember Steve, who took over for, Joe Montana was lefty. And he was a lefty, and he had played in the USFL. Remember? Steve, I forget his last name. Too old. But he now does commentary on TV, and he played for so many different teams. So now the fact that you brought this up, that's even more important. But at any rate, I'm with you 100%.
So let me tie this to the prominence of American Samoan athletes, disproportionate to the population for their group, and the connection that I make astrologically is American Samoa is under one of the United States astrocartography. That means when you relocate the chart of the United States to different places around the world, what is on the angle of that spot? And when you go to American Samoa, Mars is exactly overhead. And it is the Mars effect zone, Michelle Goklin, who we discussed in the previous GPS, he brought that to the consciousness of the astrological and the world community. And here we have an entire culture where the male culture that has been reinforced in that community of people, a small island nation, has Samoan Americans, or in this case, he was born in Hawaii, so he's a Samoan American from Hawaii by birth, comes to the United States, becomes this phenom, and now he is in the spotlight for an issue that the entire culture is facing. And so that's what I wanted to bring, why I put him number one, was because here the United States today, as we are speaking, is having its Mars return, and in the last 2 weeks, 2 NFL games, 2 Sundays in a row, this young man, who is only in his second year, has become the poster boy for is American professional sports doing right by their athletes. And that's that's the point I wanted to make.
And I want to bring up one other thing, and then we'll go on to number 2. The money these athletes are paid, they're very young. This guy is not like Tom Brady in his 40s, and Tom Brady could have retired a long time ago. So this is a young guy. He's in his prime of life, and the pressures from coaches, from television, from the assumption, you said he's playing for Miami. He was in college at Alabama, and just what you said, Mars is on which line there in American Samoa? Above or rising? Setting?
It's the midheaven line. For me, anything that's on the midheaven is like supercharged.
Right, and let's get back to what my intro, out of bounds, we're dealing with parallels north and south, but even in the regular east-west type of ecliptic, and again, this is an important thing, just to go backwards, sort of to clarify my introduction, and I got into all of this I've shared before in many places on Great Bear and my podcast, as well as the last GPS. Dane Rudger was one of my great teachers, and in the Astrology of Personality, which he wrote when he was 41, so-called midlife crisis starting, or power surge, he got his start, Astrology of Personality. It was published by Lucis Publishing, and I've mentioned Lucis Trust and Lucis Publishing, and that's part of the whole theme of GPS astrology. What I want to say is, in the back of that book, even though it's not regular astrology, he shares all about how the Earth is wobbling and how we have different stars, like we now have Polaris as the North Star, but we have this long 26,000-year cycle. And I'll get back to TUI in a second. As you know, Wayne, I often go into this big picture and then get back to Earth here.
Oh, well, you're right.
But, the reason I wanted to bring this up is it gets back to the vertical versus horizontal. What we are all used to in astrology, because, and I'm not saying it's glamorous, it's the beauty of the signs of the zodiac and the mythology of what is the sun and the sun god and the goddess of Venus and the moon and all this lore. It's all magical in the 12 signs of the zodiac. And what Wayne and I are really getting into, what we're trying to do is balance everything out through out of bounds by saying, wait a minute, astrologers have been using this other system, and it's a vertical system of north and south from the celestial equator. I guess we would say, remember the comedian Lenny, it wasn't Lenny Bruce, it was the other guy who did the one-liners, I get no respect. And that was his thing. He would do these one-liners. I'll remember his name later. I can see him saying it, and the thing is that the parallels and the declinations get the respect of researchers, but the public, what we're trying to do is say, wait a minute, a lot of these charts, and I don't know if we have anything on TUI with this, what are called out-of-bound planets, but what I do want people to understand is what Wayne was just saying is in American Samoa, if we move America's chart to that part from Philadelphia, where we had the chart, we go to American Samoa, the planet Mars is overhead, and today Mars is returning, and he's number one of our discussion. So this is a perfect beginning.
Yes, it is. It's Ronnie Dangerfield, by the way. I get no respect at all. And Mark, so I know it's a challenge for our listeners and for lay people who come to astrology to understand the ideas that the astrologers are just they have become accustomed to. And if you think in terms of time, when you travel east and west on an airplane, you get into time zones and you get jet lag. But in the moment of everyone's birth, the sun is rising somewhere, it's setting somewhere, it's beneath the ground somewhere, and it's at its culmination. So in the moment that the United States in 1776, July 4th, came into existence, the horoscope that we use at that moment established that in that exact same moment, Mars over Samoa. So if you had somebody in Samoa and you had a smartphone and you were talking to them on the phone and said, what does the sky look like? They would say, Mars is overhead.
Right.
And
and getting back to make it really, really totally about the concussion thing, the head of the body is ruled by Aries in medical astrology.
There you go.
And you see a guy wobbling around. The whole issue is, wait a minute, how is he allowed to play? And then, the pushing a person, and the quarterback is the leader of the team. That's an Aries, Mars type energy.
Yes.
So, we go, and I'm sure in his chart, we're going to, his own Mars, we'll post these charts again. We're going to create an Astro scoreboard. So whatever you are hearing, be patient with us. And my daughter, Katya, who's the facilitator of all this, between Wayne and myself, she will get charts, and either on the GreatBearEnterprises.com website, we will either create a zone for all this, or more hopefully on YouTube, where this will be. It won't be in GPS Astrology, although we may put a link to it. So again, with GPS Astrology, there are so many links. But this will be on YouTube, and we'll have the charts available, and one way or another, we'll put Tui's chart, and I don't know, you can tell people we probably have a sunrise chart, his month, day, and year, or do we actually have a birth time for him? Do you know?
We have a sunrise chart for him, but, again, that's less important in this case, because he, like the little girl who fell down the well in Texas, he becomes the catalyst for the people facing the issue.
Right, and I'm just bringing it to the point of, for those people who want to investigate further, that's that's why we just came up. And this is literally today. Wayne and I are excited that we have done this dozens of times unrecorded. We feel fortunate to have been able to do on August 7th, late in the afternoon, we did our first one for an hour plus, and now we're going to obviously do more than an hour because we're only on point one, and this is a story of a life. Wayne and I, we have the standard joke, because I'm from New York, we might as well say it again, and there's that concept of the New York Minute, and I'll say to Wayne, hey, do you have a New York Minute? And then he'll say, okay, call, and then the question is, how many quote-unquote New York Minutes make up a New York Minute in the Mark Lerner realm of reality? And it can go, a New York Minute has gone as far as, 2 hours and 20 minutes sometimes, until our phones have to be charged again?
Right. And so, having said that, Mark, let me move to number two.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. So number two on our list, and this is extremely important, it's not sports, but it's the energy behind sports, because there's the violence and there's the strength and there's the machismo and all the rest. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is in the news prominently. Why? Because Ukraine wants to join NATO now after Russia annexed the eastern part of Ukraine. So without getting into the entire Ukraine-Russia war, we can just look at NATO and what it means for the United States. The NATO treaty was signed in Washington, D.C., and when it was signed, Mercury in the horoscope was at 24 degrees of Virgo. And so for our listeners who are astrologically literate, 24 degrees of Virgo in the horoscope, Mercury, that's for life. So any planets contacting that during the course of the life of NATO, it's a Mercury season. Well, when Ukraine approached NATO and said, now we want you to expedite our joining, NATO was about to have their Mercury return, and it was exact this morning. This morning, we do this GPS. And so It will have a progressed full moon, again, another tool in the tool belt of astrology. And this is a very abstract concept. And as we go through these GPS examples, you'll hear more and more the mention of a progression and what it entails. And this will go into the scoreboard too, right, Mark?
Yes, it will.
Scoreboard. So in 5 weeks, during the time of a total lunar eclipse, NATO will have its progressed full moon. So this is quite a season for NATO, America's involvement in NATO, all the NATO nations, and without having to go into detail, the United States has, in its derivative astrocartography map, serious planets, including Mars, running through the NATO country. So here we just had a Mars return, and it's layer upon layer upon layer, just like Mark pointed out, that Tua's concussion protocol involved the head, and the head is Mars, and he's also the leader of the team, and the leadership is ruled by Aries Mars. And so this is the magic of this tool that we are playing around with, going back and forth like a tennis match between sports and the geopolitical real world that we live in. Mark, take it away.
Well, I'm going to take it away because you just led me into something that, at another point, one of the two main areas, I've shared this before, that I've researched on the nuclear axis, which I got into with Welcome to Planet Earth as a newsletter, Taurus edition, when it was still a newsletter before we became a newspaper and a magazine. This is the mundane newspaper. We call it mundane astrology. I prefer to call it Earth astrology for 20 years, from 1981 to 2000. In the nuclear axis, I'll get back to that in a moment, but when the nuclear axis, because what Wayne is bringing up is NATO is kind of like, this isn't just Vladimir Putin threatening nuclear kind of things. It's so different than, Khrushchev banging his shoe at the UN saying, "We will bury you." And when Nixon was vice president, they had this kitchen debate, and we go back in time, which shows how old I am and watching TV. And then we went back with the Kennedy years, the Berlin Wall, the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, this is a ridiculous summation. We will do some special things on this. Wayne and I have had numerous unrecorded things about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This morning, we were going over, just so you know, Curtis LeMay, who was a great general, lived to be 84 years. When I say great, it's questionable about his position, particularly during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We'll get into that another point. But here's what I want to say. The issue of GPS astrology is coming out on Sunday, October 9th. Okay, we're doing this on October the 4th. In 5 days, this is going to come out. I decided that I wanted GPS astrology. We're going to be quarterly. Originally, the goal was, hey, maybe we could do this every month. Then, based on my daughter's schedule, it's like, Dad, we should, maybe 2 months. And now it's quarterly. Will we go to every 2 months? I don't know. But by doing it at the full moon, we get the fullest tide of astrological energy of that cycle. And guess what, everybody? And maybe it'll surprise you, Wayne. On Sunday, when the full moon happens at 16 plus Libra Sun and 16 plus Aries, moon, the moon is with Chiron, because Chiron, the wounded healer, is in Aries, the sign of the head. And so when this is coming out, the fact, going back to number 1 and number 2, so number 1 is a person within sports. Now, as Wayne is saying, we've got another, quote-unquote, I hesitate to say sports, the chess game between Vladimir Putin and the United States is being played out through Ukraine and all of these NATO countries. And Brother Wayne, you'll testify to this. We're not going to get into it now. We're going to go to point 3. But did I or did I not bring up Austria this morning, or yesterday morning, only because I looked through the list of NATO countries, and as Wayne and I have been watching, recently Finland and Sweden want to join. They have not been in. That's still pending. The country of Turkey and their leader for a while was blocking it for various personal and Turkish reasons, and then recently, for whatever reason, he said, okay, I'm not going to block it. These are all part of this war scenario thing, which, I'm saying the word, and Mars is, again, the planet of war, traditionally agriculture. Mars ruling Aries is a planet of planting seeds. Mars traditionally has always ruled two signs. We can get into this another time. Pluto was discovered in 1930. Astrologers jumped to a conclusion, Pluto's the god of the underworld. It's got to rule Scorpio. Not so fast. Maybe it does, but it has a 247-year cycle. And every 2 years, Mars makes every aspect and goes around. To me, Mars rules Scorpio, and Scorpio is a planet of death and rebirth. So this gets back to the fact, my answer here is, this whole Out of Bounds is going to be featured at the full moon of Libra, Sun, Aries moon. That day, this coming Sunday, the moon will be conjunct Chiron, as it is every month, and we're going to have more football games. And this whole topic of not just Tui and the concussions, but what's happening, what happens every Sunday morning before football games? All the week's news on television and so on, people catch up before they have their sports, right? These gladiatorial, stadium experiences. And part of what's going to be brought up is the pain of what's happening in Europe, the threats and pains of a nuclear battle between these two gladiators of American Russia with nuclear weapons in the theater of Europe, just as we're watching these football games in the microcosmic world. There's my answer.
Okay, and Mark, the cover of my book has the Washington Monument, and embedded in the Washington Monument is a Saturn rocket, the rocket that took men to the moon.
I'm looking at it right now.
There's a reason those two visuals are on the cover. They're phallic symbols.
Right.
They are Mars, and the biggest obelisk in the world, 555 and a quarter feet tall. The Washington Monument, a memorial to President George Washington, and it's right on a major line derived from the U.S. horoscope. Now, when we look at the culture, the American culture, and we see this hyper masculinity, this
right.
Minuteman, this Iwo Jima raising flag, this conquering hero. It's okay. That's okay because every creature alive has to have a defensive mechanism.
Right.
But when projected out in the culture and given a hyper amount of emphasis like we have in our culture, and we will get to it as we get into some more of these sports figures, as in particular the next one, how it's over the top, it's out of bounds, it's disproportionate. And the country, as we can see, just looking at the news, is struggling between the violent nature of asserting yourself and exercising your First, Second Amendment rights, and the idea of, let's keep this on the level of dialogue, folks. Let's make sure we get our words. Go ahead, Mark.
Let me. In my intro, I wanted to mention different books, and let me just mention War Impulse Pattern. This is Wayne A. Moody's book, War Impulse Pattern, Primer to Not on the Map, ! How to See America's War Impulse Pattern, the WIP. The cover is amazing. It's very evocative, and you can order this book. You'll see in GPS Astrology in several places. We have a book page with 6 different books. He's in there. And the page before his section of the next GPS Astrology, and if you go back to the last one, in the, I think it's the astrophotography page just before, you'll also see his book presented. So please, everybody, get War Impulse Pattern. It's fantastic, and it's unique. And that's the other thing, is I always tell Wayne, what Wayne has been doing for so many decades. And again, this goes back to our lives together with Welcome to Planet Earth, and we've learned so many other things that we have been doing in the course of the last 30 years, where we would say, Oh my God, you worked for that organization? So did I, and we were working for the same organization named ABC, if I can say that. And it was like, I'm working there in Manhattan, and then Wayne says, wait a minute. Did you just say ABC?
Wait, Mark, today, before we came on the air, there was an announcement of the Nobel Prizes given out to 3 men in quantum physics.
Right.
And one of them had to do with Einstein's rule, this crazy thing that he came up with that had to do with connections at a distance.
Right.
And they called it the spooky effect or something like that. Well, I'm being coy about this, but Mark and I, living our independent lives before we came together, we had a kind of situation of a connection at a distance where literally Mark may have walked we may have crossed the same street and walked the same path for a couple of minutes apart, doing pretty much the same thing. So, it's not far-fetched. By the way, the conclusion of the people who got the the Nobel Prize doesn't support it. But I'm not going to get into that because it's going to eat up our GPS time. Right. I'm going to move on to three, unless you have something to say, Mark.
No, let's go to 3. Yeah.
Okay, so 3. Everybody can relate to this if you've been living and breathing in America since 1980. And so it's Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson is the poster boy for Mars in America, in my view. Using the tools that Mark and I have in our tool belt, and when you apply them, it's just astonishing how Marsy Iron Mike Tyson is. Now, I've written an article which is going to be appearing in the GPS online magazine, so I'm not going to go too far with the insights. But I'll put it this way. When we look at his horoscope, we find that his Mars is indeed out of bounds, which means it has a declination higher than 23 degrees north, 26.
And
so at birth,
or south.
Pardon?
Or south.
Or south, that's correct. Right. And add to that, and this is the amazing coincidence, which is why I chose him, is he's having his Mars return today, drumbeat, as we present this second out-of-bounds GPS presentation. He has Mars at 22 Gemini, 43 minutes, and the United States Mars, which just like an hour ago returned, is at 22 Gemini and 21 minutes. So Mark and I have a great deal of fun with all of these things. By the way, his nickname, Iron Mike, Iron, in astrology, for thousands of years, the Iron Age, it's connected with the weapons that cultures use to conquer other cultures. The Iron Age was the advent of swords that could beat the Bronze Age. And here we go. Like, it just never ends. We feel like we're in a dream sometimes, the way the connections and the dots line up. So there's a reason why he lives in our American society and why his story has been so public, whether it be the domestic abuse and him getting jailed for it, whether it be him biting off ears, or whether it be him being able to knock out everybody he came came before him, 31, 33 knockouts in a row, and some of the knockouts were like within a minute. So anyway, that's my say on Iron Mike Tyson. Okay. You have anything?
Yeah, I do. I'll make it quick. Before that, you were reading about physics awards for influence at a distance. Okay?
Yes.
Somewhat overturning or changing some of Einstein's views, whatever it is, or attempting to disprove it, and so on. Iron is this 26th element in the periodic table, and having studied this since I was a kid, and Wayne as well, with all of his work with talismans, you'll have to explore everything that Wayne, a lot of this is in Welcome to Planet Earth over the years, same thing with my stuff. But the thing I wanted to say was the core of the Earth, the reason why we have a magnetic field which protects us from things like solar flares, hopefully, and coronal mass ejections and everything else, and protecting us from all kinds of other things is because the core of the Earth, and we don't know everything, but we definitely have iron at the center of the Earth. There's also potentially molten iron, and it's iron that makes the magnetic field happen, right? So it gets back to this whole thing of even number one here, talking about Tui, and somebody like with Iron Mike, almost like to say his magnetism, his having Mars with the U.S. Mars, that's what you're saying. He happened to come in on his day of birth, and there are many other things about his chart that I noticed. We won't get into all of it, but he's born the day of a Uranus-Pluto conjunction, 1966, and those are very rare. There were 3 of them, and when Wayne showed me the chart, one other thing is, it was only right before we started today that the article that Wayne has on Iron Mike and astrology and the war impulse pattern and all these other things that he brings together, which is so beautifully done, my daughter, who had designed this several days ago, sent the PDF to both Wayne and myself, so we were just sort of tuning into all that, and my daughter has very strong Aries and Mars. You see what I mean? So the synchronicity factor, brought to us by Jung, who studied astrology, on so many different levels, that's a large part, one of, sort of recognized Carl Jung, the great Swiss psychotherapist who did the charts of married couples and so on, kind of like a Michel Gauquelin, but not to the extent, as far as the specific nature of statistics and so on. But it turns out that Carl Jung did astrological work, among all the other things he did in psychotherapy and mythology, mandalas, and everything else. We stand on the shoulders of giants. At the end, I do want to mention some of these, the Neil Mickelson 100-Year Ephemeris, Michael Erlewine's Astrophysical Directions. I'm mentioning it now, the Book of World Horoscopes by Nicholas Campion. I'm just throwing out these names because I wanted to do that at the beginning, but, in the beginning I was sharing a little bit more about, vertical, horizontal, the ecliptic, the zodiac versus the celestial equator, because these, as Wayne is saying, we're going to put that scoreboard up, and eventually people are going to be saying, okay, now I'm getting it a lot more. These guys are sharing this information, and when you go to the scoreboard, that will help. So we can go on to number 4 here, whoever or whatever is 4. Yes,
and those 3 books that you just mentioned, Mark,
right.
The Ephemeris, Michael Erlewine's book, and Neil and Campion's book, right. Those are essential books to have, reference right. books to have in any astrological library or toolbox. You need those because we basically, every conversation we have, we find ourselves going to these books.
Right.
Okay, number 4. And a big grin is going to cross your
Mark.
face,
okay.
Mark. A big face,
right.
a big grin. Number 4, the Roger Maris story.
Yeah.
So, Mark has for the last week been pounding at me about the asterisks next to that will appear next to Judge's name if he did not, within a certain amount of games,
right.
Hit his 61st home run. And
right.
so, I'm not Mr. Baseball like Mark is, and so I have to go to the reference books and look him up and see what I could see. Well, what's interesting is that he is a slugger for me.
Yep.
And that since the 20th century, early in the 20th century, baseball has been considered America's pastime. It's been the sport that defines America the most, and it plays a massive role in America's culture overall. All those sports analogies, all of those out of bounds.
Yeah.
That's what Mark and I have been playing on. It's the sports analogies that play out in the life of little kids, their parents, modeling after their parents. They hear it said around the home, and so it's the vernacular in America. Well, the home run king, the home run hitter, is an elite,
right,
in America's pastime, and he's become the epitome of masculine qualities embodying power and athleticism. And so we get Babe Ruth, who is the Sultan of SWAT, and Henry Aaron actually said baseball was built on the home run. Mm-hmm. Henry Aaron, hammering Henry. And,
right.
It's like, and what are they holding? They're holding this club. Again, the missile and the Washington Monument. Here, baseball's got this club. I mean, that's as far as I'm going to take it, folks, but run with it.
You're not going to believe the answer I'm going to give you because...
Well, you're from New York, of course.
No, but this is numerology. This is numerology 101. It's so fantastic that you brought up Henry Aaron, because Henry Aaron, who, passed Babe Ruth's record, and I can remember exactly when he hit 715 against Al Downing of the Los Angeles Dodgers. And Al Downing had played for the New York Yankees. This is a backstory which I won't want to get into, going back to the 1964 World Series. But at any rate, I actually created a podcast about this because my great hero is Mickey Mantle. However, having said that, Aaron's last name is the first name of Aaron Judge. And Aaron Judge wears number 99. By the way, Einsteinium is named after Albert Einstein, whose sun moon arc, which is another thing. I know this is people will say, what is he talking about? But Albert Einstein, we know his chart and even have a birth time from a while back. It's the most famous scientist probably since Newton. So we have an exact chart for Albert Einstein, born March 14, which is now Pi Day, 1879. And Albert Einstein's sun in Pisces and moon in Sagittarius are separated by an arc of 99 degrees. So just think about that statistic. Why is the 99th element named after Einstein called Einsteinium and the two most prominent parts of his chart? And this is not, he has a birth time. So this is his phase of sun and moon. He's born in the last quarter phase like I am. 99 degrees exactly. You name an element after, not the 98th element, it's not the 100th, it's 99.
Mark,
now,
there you go, Mark, out of bounds.
Yeah, I'm out of bounds because Aaron Judge is number 99. Why is he wearing number 99? I see players now wearing, last night in a football game, that there was somebody wearing 0. There's a quarterback that's wearing 0 for, I forget which team. They were playing on Sunday. The quarterback was 0, or a college football player. He was the quarterback. In baseball, nobody ever wore 0. In my baseball tarot, the Fool is 00. Okay, we've made the Fool, which is the so-called 0 card, usually connected to the planet Uranus. But anyway, this is my answer. Now, one thing you didn't say in Maris's chart. Okay, well, the answer here is just that Babe Ruth got his 60th home run in the 1927 World Series in the last game, and the season in baseball used to be 154 games. Then they added like 8 more games, and when Roger Maris was doing his thing in New York, I was watching, is he going to get 60 home runs within the 154-game old season, or is he going to miss it? Okay, and he got the 61st home run, one more than Ruth, but in more games. And whoever the commissioner was, I keep thinking it's Bowie Kuhn, they put an asterisk in there for the American League. Now, the difference is that in the National League, we've already had Barry Bonds, we've had, the 2 players from St. Louis, I'm going to forget their names, who each
Sammy
got
Sosa.
Sammy Sosa and the other guy for St. Louis, in that season when the other guy got 70 and then
Matt.
Eventually, huh?
The big guy,
yeah.
Matt.
Yeah, who played for Oakland and went to St. Louis. Mark McGwire. Okay, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, they had that big season. Now, later we found out that both of them, which is another whole controversial thing, were using, performance-enhancing kind of drug, PED, and then that became a whole scandal. And then we found out that Sammy Sosa also did that, and I don't know if you remember the thing where one of his bats broke, and we found out that he had a cork bat. So, he had 66 homers. So a lot of these people haven't gone in the Hall of Fame. That's a whole other thing. But one other thing is that then Barry Bonds broke all those records, and then he had those issues. Now, the final thing, though, about what happened with Aaron Judge, which I found remarkable, this is more of a spiritual thing of Babe Ruth looking down. Like you just said, the Sultan of SWAT. Yankee Stadium was built for Babe Ruth. And the New York team used to be what was called the New York Highlanders. Then they became the New York Yankees as part of the whole history. And I think it was April, whatever it was, 1923, the new Yankee Stadium opened. And what happened was the foul line was this is very specific with numbers. They made it what was called the small porch because he was a left-handed batter. So for decades, and now we have a different Yankee Stadium. They destroyed the old one. It's now the parking lot there, and then they made a new Yankee Stadium. So the right field foul line is 310, 320. But it used to be, and I'm not exaggerating, 298 down the right field line. And so that's where Maris actually hit his home run. It was a couple of rows in. It wasn't in the upper deck or anything. It wasn't like a colossal thing. It was pretty much a gone home run when he hit the 61. But he has forever had to have that asterisk. The thing with Judge was he had 7 games when he had 60. When he tied the record, he had several more games. He had 59. So he finally got the 60th home run, but that didn't give him 61. And then he had 7 more games to get 61, and he didn't do it in 154. He did do it the other day, and now he hasn't hit 62. And they only have a couple more games. So that's where we are now. In other words, to be decided, or next time on Out of Bounds, we will find out whether he gets the 62 or not, because he hasn't gotten there yet.
Next time on, and meanwhile,
right.
On the West Coast, you have a guy who's supposed to be over the hill.
Oh, wait, he just hit it. Well, hold on. Aaron Judge hits home run number 62 right now.
Right now? Okay.
Right now while we were talking. And if people can't appreciate what we're doing...
All right. But Mark, here's what we're doing. We're on the West Coast. Where's he playing? On the East Coast?
They're playing on the East Coast. No, they're playing in Texas. The Texas Rangers in Texas.
All right. Well, here, let me again back to the real world and some scholarly approach to understanding this. Here's what they say about the goofy effect. It's spooky. The 2022 Nobel Prize goes to seminal tests of the spooky action at a distance. So here we are. We're having this conversation, and in that moment, 5:17 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, he hits number 62. We're talking about it. His name is spilling off of our lips. Okay. Here's what they say in this article. Cornell University physicists once described quantum entanglement as the closest thing we have to magic, since it means the disturbances in one part of the universe can instantly affect distant other parts of the universe, somehow bypassing the cosmic speed of light limit. Take it away, Mark.
Okay, well, this is beyond my wildest dreams. My friend, immortal friend, Brother Wayne Moody, said, Mr. Baseball. That, I don't know how I'll be remembered, but the thing is, I know a lot of people say, oh, yeah, Mark Lerner did, Welcome to Planet Earth. He was on Coast to Coast. He does GPS astrology. He and Wayne are doing Out of Bounds. What we have just done today, considering how many dozens of hours you and I have done unrecorded, that we are doing our second recording, and on point 4, by the way, in baseball, right? 4 balls and you walk, right? You got first base, you got second, you got third. A home run is a 4-base hit. And we're on number 4. And that is too bizarre that this happened, and we were talking about it at length. And if I had been
wait, Mark, don't forget today's the 4th of October.
Oh my God! So talk about a new Sputnik going around the Earth with GPS technology and the name GPS Astrology. Tomorrow's newspapers won't be about Sputnik. It'll be Aaron Judge launches 62. And you and I have been talking about 1962, which is the corollary to now because of the Cuban Missile Crisis from October. I mean, how much more? This is, by the way, folks, I need to say this, and we'll go on to number 5, and maybe there'll be something about Joe DiMaggio, or Albert Pujols is number 5, and he just had 700 home runs. These numbers, you know, I mean,
702. He hit 702.
If the Daily News in New York picks up on our vibe, and the Sputnik thing, you know, if I were working for the Daily News or the New York Post, it wouldn't be in the New York Times. They wouldn't go this far in exaggeration. But the Daily News would, Judge launches 62 on the 65th anniversary of Sputnik. Then you put Sputnik on one side, right? And then on the other side, you got Aaron Judge with a thumbs up, number 62. I mean, we just made a headline for the Daily News.
There we go. Out of bounds as usual.
And
hey,
we're nearing.
Mark, we're going
to go to number 5. By the way, folks, we're at minute 59. You know, so had we gone another 3 minutes, we'd be on minute 62. Okay, let's go to number 5. We're going to have to crowd a bunch of these in. Okay.
All right. Listen, I had gone over. I'm going to say this real quick, and we don't have to dwell on it. Because NATO is so important, and because Putin has threatened his tactical nuclear weapons if Ukraine contests the annexation of the eastern territory. So I'm back to NATO here, but here's the list that I have. It's around the time of the Mercury station direct at 24 Virgo, and the United States has its Neptune line running through the exact location where the pipeline was first broken.
Okay.
So the United States has a Neptune line that's derived from its horoscope from 1776, July 4th, and that line is a Neptune descending. Remember, the sun rises, it sets, it's at the nadir, and it's at the culmination. So it's descending. In the moment that the United States was established, it's descending over the western Baltic. And the western Baltic is where the first pipeline burst happened, and they believe it was sabotage. Okay?
Right.
So this is during the Mercury station. There's this war of words between NATO and Russia, and lies passing, I guess, back and forth or whatever. Total dissembling on the part of, I guess, the guilty party. But there you go. It's just a war of words. But what else happened? Well, we have Ukraine requesting the expedited admission. So that's a paperwork thing. That's a verbal thing. We have Italy turning to the far right in their election. And so now it's up in the air whether they can get a unanimous NATO agreement to do anything, or if Italy will lean to the Russian sphere. Okay. So what concerns me is that the news that has come out from that area of the world where the United States has a line where Mercury literally stationed on that line, which, by the way, that line is connected to the U.S. midheaven, so it has to do with leaders and what they do. And so that is those are some details I wanted to add to that NATO report, because they are so extremely important to every single one of us living today. Now I'll move on to number 5.
Oh,
okay.
I thought that was.
That was number 5, but I have just quickly run over it, and we're not going to give it a whole lot of play. But number 6 is Hurricane The hurricane hit Fort Myers in western Florida. Western Florida and the Cape Canaveral, where they had the Artemis rocket sitting on its pad, waiting to be launched, and they had to make a last-minute decision as to whether or not to put it under cover. Thank goodness they did, because they had no idea that the hurricane would head in their direction, dropping 14 and 20 inches of rain and completely destroying Fort Myers. They're only now finding the extent of the damage. What is it about the U.S. horoscope derivative map that makes these places so vulnerable and in the spotlight today? It's a Uranus descendant line that runs right through Cape Canaveral, diagonally down, right through Fort Myers, and the pattern that I discuss in my book called the War Impulse Pattern, one of its three components, Mars, Neptune, and Uranus, they're all active because one of them is active. If one of them's active, they're all active. There's two of them actually exactly active. And now we have this catastrophe happen along the Uranus line. By the way, the news just did a breaking news. They superseded all of the other programming, and they have Aaron Judge hits the 60-second home run, and they're showing it.
Well, let me make a very brief comment on the oil. I only want to say this. Communism, socialism in its original form comes out of the discovery of Neptune, which is a focal point for various reasons in different ways in Wayne's book as well. And he and I talk about this a whole lot, the discovery chart of Neptune, which is very unusual because Saturn and Neptune were at the same degree in Aquarius, within 1 degree of the United States moon and Pallas Athena, and a third planet, which I've shared about on my podcast called Quaoar, get into that, in late Aquarius. We're currently having Saturn for the first time in 30 years, transiting that area, which is also the Neptune discovery area. So Saturn has already sort of gotten close, but it's going to come back in the late fall into the winter, which is important because of the snapping of that cable. That's Nord Stream 2, right? It's not being used necessarily, but it's a warning about what the Russians might do over the winter, right, with Europe. And we think that it was the Russians doing it. And, of course, Vladimir Putin is trying to say, no, we did it. So there's that lying, there's that subterfuge. That's like, what's a real fact? And Neptune is great.
Mark, and Mercury is the gases, and the tremendous breakout of methane gas apparently out of that pipeline, and they say it's a total it's a climate change disaster. They say let's remember also, Gorbachev recently died. One of the worst things that happened was Chernobyl. He lied about it. The only way we found out was radioactivity going over Finland and Sweden, the very areas that are now trying to become part of NATO, because they're afraid that Putin, with all of his autocratic energies and whatever illness or whatever he's got, and we'll get into Putin another time. He'll be on our scoreboard. So, again, because we want to add these other things, we got this late-breaking kind of situation on the anniversary of Sputnik. We got an Aaron Judge Sputnik going on in baseball and sports. So it's fascinating to me, two guys talking sports and astrology, and I don't want to say the word Trump for those people who don't like that name, but definitely tonight, like you just said, we're pushing aside an earlier thing today was the former president wants an emergency session of the Supreme Court. By the way, he is a Gemini sun with a Sagittarius moon. Sagittarius has a lot to do with sports. And we have Mars hitting that part of his chart, his sun, his moon, going to the Supreme Court that just reopened yesterday, October 3rd. Now he wants an emergency session to go over the things. Which, let me add, Mark, which is where the Mercury station happened.
Right. And 3 hours ago, as we know with the ex-president, we're not going to dwell on this. We're going to go to point 7, which is the Mickey Mantle point. Can I say that? Magic number 7 in a moment. But we're doing this. It's almost like live news. In this sense, it's exciting because let me bring up one other person. Eugene McCarthy played baseball. Okay, when he ran again, talk about something out of bounds. When he didn't upset Lyndon Johnson in the New Hampshire primary of 1968. He came close. People were shocked, okay, that Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire, in those days, the New Hampshire primary, it's only recently that people go to Iowa caucuses, whatever, and look at that. It used to be whatever's happening in New Hampshire sets the tone. And in that thing, Bobby Kennedy, we'll get into this another time, decided not to run. Eugene McCarthy was the anti-war candidate. We had all these issues with the Vietnam War after, President Kennedy had been murdered, and we get the civil rights. We get the Vietnam War. We have this whole strange thing for several years. We also get later that year in 1968 the assassination of Martin Luther King on April 4th in 1968. That Bobby Kennedy, when he's campaigning, because he comes back in to try and become president, he's the one who tells the country about Martin Luther King. 2 months later in June, he's assassinated. Meanwhile, back in New Hampshire, it turns out McCarthy has such a powerful showing that Lyndon Johnson goes on television, which is at the very end of February, and says, I will not seek and I will not accept, the candidacy of my party. And then Bobby Kennedy on March 16th, 2 weeks later, reevaluates everything, decides to throw his hat in the ring, and he's murdered. I mean, this is all back to 1968. So what I'm saying is, politics is often like so powerful. Today, the former president who loves to be in the limelight thought he had the whole thing. And a New York Yankee baseball player, a young guy who's about 30 years old, who's just had a Saturn return, struggling to get past the Babe and Roger Maris and Asterisk.
Not just
as we're doing, he's from New York. He's playing for the New York Yankees. That's the hometown of the former. Huh?
Oh, I'm agreeing with you, Mark.
What I'm saying is the former president. Look, love him or hate him, wherever people are at, we got a Donald Trump who was a real estate agent. I grew up in Queens, not far, 4 years after he was born. It's a nearby neighborhood. We all knew who he was. The other Donald Trump, beyond the casinos and the real estate, was the guy on television who created the Apprentice and the Celebrity Apprentice. He won a lot of awards. He did all these different things. He became international, national entertainment and so on. For about 3 hours today, the attention of the networks is all on the Supreme Court that just opened, the former president, and now in one swing in Texas, where John F. Kennedy lost his life, right? Aaron Judge, number 99, Einsteinium, E equals MC squared. On the day of the Sputnik anniversary, what will the headline tomorrow be? The question will be: Will the New York papers run? Former president goes to the Supreme Court for an emergency ruling, or will they go with? And that was the Eugene McCarthy line. I have to say that Eugene McCarthy was asked about politics and his baseball life when he was playing baseball, and here's what he said to a reporter. He said, the difficulties, the evils of the world are on page 1, but when you go to the back page, you get the sports. And that's what growing up in New York was, the Daily News, the New York Post. When we would get it as kids, you didn't open up the first page. You went to the back pages where all the sports were. And that was, Eugene McCarthy said, these are the sort of like, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat through sports, like ABC logo. Eugene McCarthy, because he was into sports and played baseball, said when he gets the newspaper, even though he was a politician and a poet and a writer, said, I go to the back pages first to look at the sports.
All right.
Number 7.
And there we go, out of bounds. And Mark, are you feeling it? Are you feeling that Mars return in the U.S. horoscope? Are you feeling that energy in the air? You certainly were in stride just for the last couple of minutes. The speed with which you've laid out your narrative.
I've never looked at Aaron Judge's chart. We are so busy, Wayne and myself. What you did with Roger Maris the other day, which will go on the scoreboard, was a tour de force, because what Wayne isn't saying is he found the exact time in what's called the Lois Rodden Astro Databank for when Roger Maris was born. This goes back to the Michelle Gauquelin thing, just as a pointer here. This is kind of important. AA rating. In other words, somebody found his exact birth time, and then the other thing was when he hit that home run, you gave the exact time of that and that information to me, right?
Well, real close. They said he was the third batter, and that the game started at 2:03 p.m.
Right.
So I extrapolated. I assumed that he would get to the plate around 2:30.
But in one of the charts, I think in his birth chart, Mars was very prominent. And you just mentioned about the slugger, Hank Aaron, the Sultan of SWAT. And Roger Maris did this in the right field lower bleachers, which were built for the Sultan of SWAT, the whole design of that stadium. And that stadium came in April of 1923, at the start of that season. Baseball begins in spring. Baseball, this is another thing we could talk about, because I created the Baseball Tarot with Laura Phillips. Only have a couple of decks left.
Isn't that the season of Mars?
Well, the whole idea, there was a movie with Ray Milland, which was, we're going to go far afield here. I want to get to number 7. And we'll go longer, we don't have to end at a certain minute. This is historic, what we're doing right now, at least for me it is, with Judge and everything else. But the thing was, there was a movie, it was fabulous. If people want to watch it, it happens every spring. And Ray Milland, he was the star of The Lost Weekend and many other things, Dial M for Murder, his major star of the 1940s and 50s. He did a baseball movie, and in the movie, he played a professor. I don't know if you ever saw this, and he was a chemist, and he found this there was some kind of weird thing. I don't want to give the whole thing away. But he then, because it made a baseball move, that's what I'm going to say. It's a fabulous movie. And he winds up being a pitcher who puts stuff, like the stuff on the baseball and makes it become weird, like being a curveball, being a screwball. It happens every spring is the name of that movie. It's funny. It's intriguing. You learn a lot about chemistry. You learn a lot about education. And you learn how that links up to sports and baseball.
All right. I'm throwing you a change-up right now, Mark.
Okay.
Here comes the change-up. That's what the catcher called for. All right. So Mars is the armed forces of a country.
Right.
All right. So this is a report that appeared just a couple of days ago, October 2nd, and it says the U.S. Army fell about 15,000 soldiers, or 25% short of its recruitment goal this year. Mm-hmm. Officials confirmed this on Friday. Despite a frantic effort to make up the widely expected gap in a year when all the United States military services are struggling in tight jobs market to find young people willing to enlist. Now, again, on a day when Mars is stationing, this report came out 48 hours ago. So it is definitely at a time when Mars is not moving in the sky, and it is certainly very important for the United States, who's funneling all of these military supplies overseas, and then watching the North Koreans shoot an intercontinental ballistic missile 4,000 miles over one of their key allies. So that that the Joint Chiefs and that the military people, they're all over this. In fact, having been in the military, I go so far as to say certain stages of the world are on a high DEFCON.
Right. Well, the comment I would make is, there's just so many different levels. You said one thing, I just want everybody to be clear. You said something, Mars being stationary. Mars is on top of the U.S. Mars today and is slowing down and will make an official station
on
October 30th. But the important point that what you said that reminded me to tell everybody is Mars will be returning 3 times. And when you have a planet like Mars, I've done these two podcasts, The Truth About Mercury Retrograde. I'm not going to get into all that. We just left the Mercury Retrograde. There'll be another one at the end of the year, starting around December 29, going into the beginning of January 2023. Retrogrades have an enormous influence. What I rebel against is creating fear, in people's minds. Oh my God, don't do this, don't do that. Now, the thing about Mars, though, it's infrequent, okay? The United States progressed Mars going back to July 4th, 1776, and I did this work a long time ago under George W. Bush in 2006, went retrograde in what we call the secondary progress. The progressions, as you may know, folks, from going to my website, if you studied, there's different kind of progressions, secondary progressions, solar arc progressions, tertiary progressions. They go back to basically the birth day, a week, month, year of when you were born. They're not transits which relate to now, okay? The now of any time, 2022, next year, last year, where are the planets moving in the sky? So progressions are the sort of gradual unfolding using sort of a symbolic unfoldment. They're very powerful. And one of the things we sort of forgot to mention, everybody, that you reminded me the other day is the United States progressed moon just came back in Aquarius. And I was talking about Saturn being in Aquarius. But the progressed moon of the United States, just in the last, 2 to 3 weeks, has come back, and that only happens every 27 years. So we're having all of this very powerful energy. And in mundane or Earth astrology, the moon is the public, right? And you just reporting that the U.S. Army is having problems, right? Recruitment. And the thing is, when we were in college, this is where we had the draft because of Vietnam, okay? Some people went, some people didn't go. Some people went to Canada because they didn't think we should be fighting Vietnam. Now, that's a whole other story, but it goes back to the Lyndon Johnson years where we have civil rights, we have all this different legislation. By the way, the Voting Rights Act of 65, this was earlier today because the Supreme Court is going to get into this issue about voting and gerrymandering and all these other things based on, I guess, something from Alabama, which goes back to Toohey. The quarterback from Alabama, point one, the Supreme Court will be hearing this case, and it could wind up creating all these problems about our next votes, not so much for the midterms, which are challenging enough because we got this total lunar eclipse. But the other thing is this Mars energy that Wayne is bringing up today with all these different points. Mars will slow down. It will stop at 25 degrees, 25 plus of Gemini, the day before Halloween. It will go retrograde and then stop, just so everybody knows, on January 12th of next year at 8 plus of Gemini, which is the United States Uranus degree from July 4th that Wayne just talked about, July 4th, 1776, which is a line of energy going through Cape Canaveral and all these places in Florida. And one other point, Wayne and I have been talking about how, in many ways, Einstein's idea about the space-time continuum, and even though we have an unusual thing on our charts where one of us has Jupiter rising, the other one setting. But what I realized, and I brought up to Wayne, is I've been doing the cosmic calendar for 41 years. And it's a very Saturn thing. Saturn rules time or chronological time. And when I signed up to do this, I wasn't thinking, I want to be a part of Father Time and the clock and so on. But I've been doing it for 41 years, all these specific times. And Wayne Moody is a master of longitudes and latitudes and the Earth places, which is a very Jupiterian thing. And we've just been talking about this in private and realizing so much about these two largest planets in the solar system. And one other thing, because you brought this up to me over and over again, Wayne would say to me a week ago, last Monday, the Sun and Jupiter came into the Earth and Jupiter came into their closest relationship. And Wayne was pointing it out to me and said, hey, you need to make sure you go out, Mark, aside from all the stuff you're reading, and actually look at Jupiter. And I said, hey, I'm looking at Jupiter. I am looking at it. So we just had that, Jupiter closest to the Earth during a Sun-Jupiter opposition that was a week ago on Monday, right? And we just had that, and the last time that happened was back in October of 63, the month before JFK died, okay? And that was the previous closest one. And now we've got Saturn coming back to when JFK died and also during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Saturn's about to hit our moon for the first time in 29 years.
And folks, it's all logical.
Yeah. Grant Louis, Astrology for the Millions, another one of these great astrologers, another giant, he would have said he's on the shoulders of other giants, and he's one of the giants that, is part of our heritage. Go ahead. Are we at the Yogi Berra point number 8 yet? Ain't over till it's over?
No. When I revised the chart, I didn't put it there.
Okay.
Do you want to take it up and introduce it? We can edit.
No. I just go to whatever's next on your list.
All right. Well,
I'm just kidding, folks. Number 8, Yogi Berra.
Neptune has been very prominent, not just for astrologers and for us, as we look at charts that are not on the map of most people's lived reality. But when you look at something that is in the public eye, the Webb telescope, and it's sending back the first infrared imaging of the planet Neptune, while we astrologers are looking at our not on the maps of reality, it's just totally amazing, the synchronicities. And if you have not seen that image, you can Google it and you can see it. It is fascinating. The clarity, the detail that we've now seen with this new level, this quantum leap in viewing the universe. Everything is changing.
Here's my add to this, because I just wrote from 1991 what I'm doing in GPS astrology. I mean, I could have put in anything. I've dozens and dozens of stories, hundreds of stories. For some reason, well, I know the reason. GPS astrology is sort of the connection back to when I worked at Lucis Trust, the Arcane School, the Alice Bailey Center, with all these several dozen books. Alice Bailey being a channel for being known as the Tibetan Master DK. And the thing is, one of the organizations that's part of Lucis Trust, you can go to Lucis Trust, LUCISTRUST.org. Online, you'll find all these different subgroups, okay? Triangles. If you go back to the cover of GPS astrology, you see Sirius, the Great Bear Sirius, and the Pleiades, okay, as a cosmic triangle there as part of the evocative image that my daughter, Lerner, created, and which will also be the cover of this next one, the one coming out. And my feeling is that there is something about one of the organizations is called World Goodwill, and so part of the theme of what we're doing here with astrology and GPS astrology, I've talked about this idea, it's sociological from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was a line in there for Francois Truffaut from Steven Spielberg. That great director was part of the Close Encounters movie with Richard Dreyfuss and E.T.'s coming back in 1977, this phenomenal movie, and he winds up trying to talk, speaking of Army, to an Army brass guy who's trying to create this diversion from Devil's Tower so that people don't see where the ETs and the spaceships are coming. And Francois Truffaut sees that Richard Dreyfuss and this other woman character, they're picking up on the vibes. Talk about, the physics thing you said earlier, feeling this sort of invisible thing. And if you go back to Close Encounters, fabulous movie, Spielberg gives the director, is always talking with a French accent to the Army general, trying to tell him that Richard Dreyfuss is on to something. We need to allow a civilian to be part of this thing because he's picking up on this vibe. And he says, General, it's an event sociological. It's sociological. And because of that and having that movie, this is part of GPS astrology. And part of that is goodwill is love in action. This is a keynote from World Goodwill, part of Lucis Trust. So what you were just talking about, and so much of what we are doing here is how do we use these tools in astrology, right? The excitement that both of us are feeling, even though Brother Wayne is not necessarily as Mr. Baseball as I was when I was growing up. I mean, for us to be on that point and now seeing the development that sports, and I was brought up with Eugene McCarthy back, when he was running against, for the anti-war movement, as a peace candidate in 1968. So this constant battle, by the way, this issue that's coming up is Libra and Aries, okay? And Libra is the sign of balance. It's the sign, the yin and the yang. And in many ways, sports and astrology and sports, numbers, which are the foundation of both of these things, right? Numbers are the core. What you wear on your uniform.
Do you think that 60-second home run was enough to balance all of the troubling and concerning vibes that we've been hearing in the last 72 hours, Mark?
The thing is, there's a reason, and look, Wayne and I talk a lot about, we have a similar view about health, about what we've experienced, what we look at the planet. That's another whole issue. Chiron has a lot to do with wounds and healing. Mercury tends to rule the whole medical establishment, the idea of the caduceus. Every planet is connected to a different part of the body in medical astrology, and, every zodiacal sign. That's a whole other thing. So it's not as if, Venus doesn't rule things. Venus has a lot to do with, Venus circulation. Mars has to do with arterial circulation. As we were talking about TUI, the head, the concussion. Part of this thing is, why do we take players out? It's not just that we say they have a concussion. We have a president of the United States now who had 2 aneurysms a long time ago. Usually that kills people more often than not. My dad, who was a doctor, explained to me, and then we'll go back to whatever we were at, 0.8 or 9 here. My dad once told me, I was thinking about this the other day, because sometimes in my older age, I'm thinking, FDR dies of a cerebral hemorrhage. How much was that different? That was basically an aneurysm. In other words, if a blood vessel in the brain, depending on its severity, what happened on data with Joe Biden was it was a smaller artery or something because he recovered. But it's not as if it didn't happen. We can't make believe that it never happened. It did, and it was quite a long time ago that it did happen. So somehow he is a survivor of that and wound up becoming president of the United States. But this is another issue, going back to point 1. And look, when we're done with this, and on Sunday when GPS astrology comes out, and whoever's going to be listening to this and get to this point 4 and say, oh my God, there was a home run, it's historic, and however we end this, nevertheless, this coming Sunday, we'll have all this stuff, and which tell me this, which reporters, which sportcasters, not just on Sunday, but on Saturday with all these football games, who's not going to be talking about TUI? Who's not going to be talking about concussions? Who's not going to be talking about head injuries? And how many injuries will there be on Saturday and Sunday, which will make everybody want to come back to us? And what we're talking about is point 1, which is Mars coming back, and not just once, but 3 times. I hand it over back to you. Are we at the Roger Maris number 9? He was number 9. Are we at 9 yet?
No, we're not doing Roger Maris. Listen, you have converted me. I have drank the Kool-Aid on baseball. I did not grow up with baseball, but I love Roger Maris too. We'll look. It's not going to go bad. It's not going to go stale. Right now, I want to go back to what you said about Jupiter. So Jupiter making its closest approach. So Mark, Judges. What planet would you say corresponds with Judges? Jupiter, and so I'm looking at Rexy Bills, folks. Rexy Bills, the rulership book, is another book that I would recommend. There are a number of astrologers, Dr. Lee Lehman and a few others, who have written some wonderful books called Books on Tables of Correspondences. It helps a person to visualize and to ground in reality the planet symbols. So I'm turning in this book called the Rulership Book, and Jupiter is given rulership over Judges.
Well, wait, and then we got Aaron Judge with the name Judge.
There you go.
Whenever the New York Yankee guy, I forget his name, the main broadcaster, which is on Yes Baseball, whatever it is, he will use a term. I don't know if he says it's another Judgian home run, but he doesn't say. He uses the term something to do with the law. You know what I mean? And the other thing I was going to say is, by the way, so everybody knows, what Wayne is saying, the guy's name is actually Rex, R-E-X, and then the middle initial is E, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, so Rex also meaning king, right, coming from king. Yeah. I mean, just as an etymology idea, Rex, E-Bills is actually the name, in case people have access in the library to this great book that Wayne often mentions to me about different keynotes. I also want to mention Charles E.O. Carter.
Yes,
who was
exactly.
one of the great British astrologers. He was the head of the Astrological Lodge of the Theosophical Society. He did all these books on political astrology, but he also did a book that I have. I have all of his books. And he's the guy who was monitoring the leader of the Nazis, Mussolini, Winston Churchill, during the war years. This guy was so phenomenal in England. And after the war years, we are both indebted to him, particularly for political astrology, which is a little thin volume. And, I'm on coast to coast.
The year of my birth, 1951.
Yeah. And I've been on coast to coast, as many of you know, about 40 times. I feel very grateful to be on that show. And, it airs for a lot of people around the world and so on. Hopefully I'll be on in another couple of months again. I was just on September 8th. On that show all the time, it's funny, it starts the same way because George Norrie, the host, wants to say, oh, you did Welcome to Planet Earth about mundane astrology. And in astrology, we never thought of that word as currently gotten sort of flipped downward, where people think mundane means, oh, ho-hum, not important.
Really?
Yeah, no, I mean, the connotation of mundane now, it's mundane. It's like just run of the mill, you see? Whereas when we got into it, mundane was kind of like a word representing worldly. So I am using Wayne's business and energies. I shouldn't say exact business titles because I know some of your business cards and so on, but often part of what you do, just like mine is great there, is under Earth Harvest, okay? And I've decided that when I'm on coast to coast, and I've said this to George Norrie, when he says to me, so what about this word mundane? I said, the way I look at it now is what I did and what I keep doing about world leaders, eclipses, new moons, full moons, and all these major events, Mars coming back, the things we're talking about out of bounds, is Earth astrology, is a better term than mundane. Even though it's the cosmic connection, we want to draw a distinction from personal astrology. Most of us, and many of you who are listening, it's like, what are they talking about? World leaders, Mike Tyson, sports, out of bounds. We're focused a lot on looking at the Earth, looking at the cosmos that's affecting whether it's NATO or individuals or sports as a whole, these broader kind of fields. So it's not, but we're all part of it. The individual is playing the sports. We're seeing the Marises, the Aaron Judges, the Tuohys. A lot of the people we're looking at are in sports, but then we look at politics and we're looking at, NATO, and we're looking at oil spills or sabotage. So whatever is happening at a moment of time, this is the thing from Jung. He said it in German. What happens at a moment of time has the qualities of that moment of time. And it sounds like a redundancy. It's unbelievably significant because this is the essence of astrology, of your chart. Anyone listening or tuning into what we're doing, we are all born at a moment of time in a particular place. That's Saturn, the moment of time in a place, Jupiter. That's the space-time continuum. I believe, and I think Brother Wayne believes, we have lived before. We don't know how all this works. Nobody, I think, on this planet understands the truth or the reality of invisible realms yet. That's a whole other topic, or reincarnation. But what we do know is that we are here on this planet at this point, and each of us, whether we know our birth times or not, whether we have the records or not, we come into the world and we utter a cry. And that's what the Declaration of Independence was for the United States. We're uttering a cry saying we want to be free from our parent. July 4th, 1776, in the late afternoon. And there's the first breath of our country. And now we're linking it back. Today, a very historic day. So anyway, where are we at with, we're about an hour and a half. We can go on.
Okay.
I'd like to go for another 20 minutes to 2 hours, and I think we can cover a couple more points.
Okay, Mark. So this is important. You approached it a little earlier, but you didn't go there because you were trying to be judicious about how much air you were going to let the former president of the United States suck out of the room. But
right.
today, the Supreme Court of the United States was in the spotlight briefly before Aaron Judge hit his 60 seconds. But here's what's important there. Jupiter, its closest approach to the Earth, is Judges. And we have had our fill these past months, past years, about judges in the spotlight and the issues of whether or not they're partial or not, and a whole rethinking of that third branch of our government. Take it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, there's so much, I was looking at last week and I kept thinking, because again, folks, Wayne and I share a whole lot. We don't share every single day, but sometimes my New York Minute, this is where Brother Wayne says, "Oh, should I take a call or not?" I think sometimes he goes out, looks at some flowers and thinks, okay, do I have the energy to have another New York Minute, which is, who knows how many minutes is going to be. But at any rate, a couple of days ago, I was thinking, oh my God, Supreme Court, October 3rd, which is yesterday. There is so much that just happened in 24 plus hours of the Supreme Court. So the fact that the former president chose today, maybe he thought, hey, I'm not going to do it on the 3rd, which was yesterday. By the way, yesterday we had a Capricorn moon and a moon conjunct Pluto, right? The god of the underworld. Today, the moon is in Aquarius, okay? And which was the chart? The United States has its nodes, to bring up another point, what are called the dragon's head and tail. A lot of you are familiar with that out there. It's in every chart. 2 horseshoes. It has to do with the moon's orbit. What Dane Rudger would say, beyond our personal moon, and I've been talking about the moon. We did a whole moon magazine in 1996 or so. Everybody was writing about the moon, and I share a lot about it on Coast to Coast, because the moon you have to look up. Our sun signs, most of us know unless you're born on what's called the cusp, and even if you think you're born on the cusp, guess what? There's 1,440 minutes in a day, and in one of those minutes, on the so-called cusp, whether it's Aries into Taurus or Taurus into Gemini, it's in 1 minute out of 1,440 minutes that the sun will change. So almost every single person ever lived, living now, or will ever live is never born on a true cusp, unless you're born during the 1 minute, right? Think about this, folks. The 1 minute between, let's say, the sun at 30 of Aries and 0 of Taurus, when that day is happening, for you to be a cusp where you're in part Aries and part Taurus, you can only do it if you're born in 1 minute out of 1,440 minutes. That's where astrology is really at statistically, if you could figure it out. It just shows what Wayne and I are doing, where we're looking at these numbers of out of bounds. We're finding things like between
that
NATO...
are not on the map, that are not on the map.
And the amazing thing is, look, we're all catching up and trying... My great teacher, Eleanor Bach, who brought us the 4 main asteroids in her hardcover book in 1973, and that's when I went in New York City to her house in Lower Manhattan with other students. And I learned all about Ceres, the largest asteroid, and Pallas Athena, the second one discovered, and then Juno, and then Vesta. So I work with all the 4 main asteroids. I've worked with them for 50 years. Then Chiron gets discovered in 1977, and I learn all about that. We have all these different writers for Walking Planet Earth, on Mundane or Earth Astrology, so many different people, Zane Stein, Barbara Hand-Clough, so many other people, issue after issue about Chiron. And then I realized my studies of JFK, wait a minute, he's born on the day, he died on the day that Chiron wasn't moving and made a station. So we have stationary bodies. Before Mercury goes retrograde, it has to stop. When it comes back and goes direct, it's also stopped, makes another station. Stations are often forgotten, whereas all the glory goes to, oh my God, this planet's going backwards. Well, folks, when planets don't have any motion, and when we get to October 30th, which is what? Today's the 4th, 26 days from now. Happy Halloween, everybody, right? Because from October 29th, 30th, 31st, November 1, you go into the Neil Mickelson 100-year ephemeris, the American ephemeris, for the 21st century, and if you have that book and you put your finger, in late October into early November, it's alarming and fascinating. Mars is not going to be moving anywhere. Whether we call it a little bit retrograde or a little bit direct, for several days, it's just going to be sitting there and exerting an unbelievable force. So as Wayne often says, are you predicting something? Yeah, here's my prediction. A very martial environment is going to happen at the end of October and the beginning of November. Where, what, how? It's going to affect all of us with all the different Rex E-Bills themes that you can imagine. We're all going to be affected in a kaleidoscope of ways. I don't believe that astrology should be used. I mean, look, if you could be a Nostradamus and see into the future and know that, somebody's going to try and do something in a war scenario, or somebody's about to hit the 60-second home run and you can sort of see it ahead of time, something good or something not good, yeah, maybe you want to warn somebody. But I don't see that as the major thing with astrology. I think what we're doing today is a kind of serious, logical research to help all of you and ourselves keep understanding the deeper levels of this toolbox. Back to you.
Well said, Mark.
Back to you. Where are we at? Do you have any more of those on the list?
Yeah, I'm going to finish up with one that'll get everybody going, because this person has been a personality in American consciousness for a long time. And we are talking about a man named Brett Favre.
Right.
And the scandal that he's embroiled in as we speak, and it's been synchronized. The publicity on it has been synchronized during all of these intense transits that we've seen of late to the United States horoscope. And, it's just so interesting. Compared to Mark and I, he's just a youngster. He was born in 1969. And I remember 1969 because 68 I was playing on Franklin Field in Philadelphia, where the Eagles played, the old stadium, and playing for a city championship. And then that winter, I had Herb Adderley, who was a Super Bowl winning athlete, the first Super Bowl, Green Bay Packers. Yeah. And he came to my school to give me a Scholar Athlete Award on stage. Well, look, and it's curious. Oh, by the way, Herb Adderley, his Mars is out of bounds, and he was standing on stage with a guy who had a Mars effect in his horoscope. So, this is well before I had even the slightest interest in astrology. But
did you mention Herb Adderley playing for Green Bay yet?
No.
Okay, that'll come up. That's important. Go ahead.
Okay, he was this all-pro defensive back who went to school in Philadelphia, and all these athletes, they do all these extra things in the off season to get a good name recognition, doing good things in the world and helping out their communities. And this was the very beginning, the Super Bowl. Anybody could go to the Super Bowl. They didn't charge you $1,500 for the bleacher seats back then, and not built this gargantuan money-making phenom that it has become. But anyway, Monday Night Football, Thursday Night Football, Friday football, Saturday football, and Sunday Night Football. I mean, it's outrageous. Well, let me get to Brett Favre. He has Mars out of bounds. And what he did, alleged to have done in Mississippi, misappropriated money that was intended for the people who, compared to him, I mean, they were impoverished. They socially, they were not socially privileged. Let me put it that way, without putting any adjectives on that'll push anybody's buttons. But it's just so interesting that he has Pluto in his horoscope at 25 Virgo and 25 minutes. And it sits on the U.S. Neptune, which is 22 Virgo. It also sits on U.S. midheaven, and that Mercury stationed while all of this great reveal about his so-called shenanigans was going on. Shenanigans that involved the state's governor, Mississippi governor, and all kinds of people who should have known better. So, here's my question, Mark Lerner.
Yeah.
Does Mississippian Favre still represent American ideals?
I've been following a lot of this story, and I have some amazing things to throw out because of our discussion. And what you brought up, where you started us on the Aaron level, and I forgot to say something, so I'm going to mention it now. So here's my statement about Brett Favre. First of all, I always find it very interesting because his last name is F-A-V as in Victor, R-E. And I realize there's weird pronunciations. I don't know his etymological and ethnic background at this point. But he's always called Brett Favre, as if it's F-R-A-R-V-E, and it is not. It's basically, I did take French in high school. I think the way his last name used to be pronounced from his father and grandfather would have been Favre. But because the way etymology works, we take off an accent mark, but his last name, and maybe this is meaningful about the whatever he's done here. And I would suppose there's a Mercury. You brought up Mercury at 24 Virgo. You're bringing it up. He may be the last person we talked about today. But get this. I want to bring up a couple of things of my memories of Brett Favre in the Green Bay Packers. You brought up Herb Adderley. He played for Green Bay. Did he not?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Linebacker? Or no,
defensive back. Defensive back.
Okay, defensive back. Okay.
Oh, by the way, Brett Favre is French ancestry. You got that right, Mark. You
right, and Mississippi. It just without my reading his, Wikipedia or any kind of thing, I'm thinking even though it's Mississippi, and some of what we bring up are these people and personalities in these stories, and what we're doing is we're linking sports, we're linking astrology, we're linking the national and the world news. We're linking our dreams, our feelings. The mythology of the Babe Ruths, the hammering Hank Aaron's. So first of all, there's 4 Aarons in tonight's discussion, so I want to get to that. But let me go back to Favre. He wore number 4 for the Green Bay Packers. 2 things happened. Aaron Rodgers, another Aaron, who wears number 12, and the Jupiter cycle, which I wrote this whole thing, that Jupiter, supposedly with a 12-year orbit, it's really 11.86 years. Everybody listen to the next podcast. Is going to be the 3rd time I'm going to be sharing about Jupiter's 83-year cycle, linking 1939-2022. Now, meanwhile, the backstory of Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers is the following. Aaron Rodgers was the golden boy from the University of California, and he was drafted by the Green Bay Packers. And he had to be the understudy for the great Brett Favre. And he was frustrated because, as we now see, Aaron Rodgers, to me, and by the way, he's a Sagittarian who's born with the Sun conjunct Uranus, to get back to other themes. Like, you didn't bring up Aaron Rodgers, but by connection to Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, with all of his controversies, recently, he has his own share of stuff about not getting vaccinated, the girlfriends that he's had, and so on and so forth. Not that it's also somewhat scandal-like, because these people are in the millions of dollars, whether they work for it or whether there's a scandal or not. But here's the backstory of what I wanted to say. I don't know if you remember this game, Wayne. Brett Favre's father died.
Yeah,
and
I remember. He played, and
not
and he
only
broke
did he
records.
Play, it was like the guy was on fire. It was the kind of thing, gives me chills now to think about. Now, like, that was probably the ultimate thing. I know Aaron Rodgers has won Super Bowl and he's trying to get another. Part of the problem is, they had an Oregon Duck player who was a tight end who was playing, then the Packers traded him away or he retired. The big question for these quarterbacks, like today, part of the story on Tom Brady, that would have been number 1, is he may be getting a separation from his model wife. That was another story today. Maybe that was going to be the number 1 news until, the former president said, hey, I'll beat that. And now Aaron Judge hits 1 home run in Texas, and now he's number 1. Will he be number 1 later tonight? Or will Vladimir Putin say, I've got a trick up my sleeve? You know, now the point is that on that particular night that you're now remembering, I remembered it because this is a long time ago. And it was like, you got to be kidding me. This guy is like throwing Hail Marys and passes, and it was like hundreds of yards, and everybody was getting it because, look, the team, talk about that physics thing you wrote up. Everybody is saying, oh, my God, his father died. He's still going to be quarterback and gets back to point one. You know, most people would like, I can't play. My father just died, and he's on the field. So that was an amazing night. Nevertheless, after that night and time went on and different things happened.
Mark, may I say this? He threw for 399 yards, 4 touchdowns.
Right. So there you go. Now, like,
second place in NFL history for career touchdown passes.
For a night?
At the time. It was in 2003, right. And at the time. So
you have to, look, we just had, here's another thing that just happened. Our current Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, his father just died.
Yes, he did.
Last weekend, he was on TV. And he was being interviewed on 60 Minutes with the former, I forget I'll remember his name in a minute. And the interviewer said on 60 Minutes, this is not this 60 Minutes, it was the last weekend 60 Minutes. By the way, it was the night, when is 60 Minutes on Sunday? It was the night of the Jupiter being closest to Earth, okay, in 63. And Anthony Blinken was being interviewed, and the reporter who used to do the CBS Evening News, and he was kind of relegated back to the thing, he's a great reporter, during the interview said, why, I mean, this was like uncanny. Why are you still doing the interview with me, Secretary Blinken? Your father has just passed in the last, 24 to 36 hours, and you're still doing an interview. And his basic thing, this is kind of like, what we've been bringing up before about, these major stories, and is the press covering this? Who's out there trying to utilize the press in what way? And there's another thing about Brett Favre I do want to bring up about Mississippi, because it's kind of important. But at any rate, so we have Brett Favre. His father has gone on to the spiritual realms, if one believes that, and he's just like a magician on the field, and he chooses to play. You know that the coach might have said, or if another guy was emotional, look, he didn't want to let his players down. This is why Tom Brady is about, I can't predict, I'm not trying to predict why he's getting a divorce, but he already retired. Before the season, then he came back. Now suddenly, his marriage is on the line because he can't stop being the quarterback of the team, right? He doesn't want to let the team down. You got football, you got the limelight, whatever it is. This will be an interesting thing about the Tom Brady thing down the road. There'll be all these interviews. Why are you doing this? What's going on in your marriage? And he'll say things like, well, I don't want to talk about it. I'll talk about it another time, blah, blah, blah. Now, they were getting millions and millions and millions of dollars. Back to Brett Favre. He got all this money, as you're saying, and the thing was, he was supposed to do something. He was supposed to give speeches, right? And he didn't do anything. He didn't do anything in support of what he was supposed to do.
The worst of what he did was his daughter apparently plays volleyball or something. Okay. And he took an enormous amount of money. He had the governor build a building, a volleyball center or something like that. And so, in addition, he was supposed to have given these speeches. People like him can name their price. And he apparently he didn't meet his agreements with some of them, and he refused to give the money back.
Okay, there you go. Right.
Pay some interest on what was owed or something like that, which made him look like a skinflint, a cheap person.
Well, and that's, the whole spirit of GPS astrology, as an example, is we're trying to create or be a part of goodwill is love in action, of creating how can all of us who are into astrology, right, whether we love sports, whatever our great loves and our hobbies are, in this situation we're using sports and our love of sports and astrology and sort of combining those and bringing in politics and education and these stories as you're listening to what Wayne is bringing up. here's the other part of the story that's important. Mississippi is in the news for a different reason, the water crisis in Jackson. Just like we had the whole thing with Flint. Remember Michael Moore? That whole thing that started Michael Moore's thing about Flint, Michigan, okay? Many, many years ago that started Michael Moore with all of his documentaries. So with that, I don't know how much the public has been watching, but we had that whole issue of the poisoned water in Jackson, the capital.
The lead in the water. The lead in the water, yes.
Yeah, and Flint that was part of the whole thing of the poison in Flint, right? I mean,
yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it had to do with this corporate kind of thing going on, which was the company, and Michael Moore did that investigation, and because of that, he became famous, right? Out of a scandal. Well, simultaneously with the sports issue, this is exactly what the point is of Out of Bounds. We're not only, I don't know what you mentioned about Planet, you mentioned something about in his chart, but the point is, I'm sure we'd find a lot of things with Brett Favre. He was a fantastic, football player during his time, but the thing was, he was repressing, so to speak, or, the Green Bay Packers had paid all this money for Aaron Rodgers, the other Aaron, the other elephant in the room, the other Aaron. We have 4 Aarons. I haven't mentioned one of them, just so I mention this, but I brought up Jackson and the water crisis. Simultaneously, we have the Brett Favre crisis with money being taken. And the thing about Jackson that connects up to this is that Jackson has a lot of poor people living in that capital, and the scandal about money and the governor, and it's not just, there's this thing about the governor, I don't want to accuse the governor, but I'm just saying the governor of Mississippi is supposedly part of this thing, is he not, with Brett Favre, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. In other words, until this is sorted out, and by the way, I do want to tell you one other thing that's ironic in all this, because I'm able to listen to certain kind of sports shows on this station I have. And when this was coming up a week or so ago, and you were saying something like, hey, maybe he'll be part of the group on the list, the station was doing this promotion that Brett Favre, I don't know if you know this, is he's on radio. In other words, he's trying to push this aside, almost like, some of the stuff with the former president saying, I didn't do this, it never happened, or whatever it is, or it's being exaggerated. I don't know what Brett Favre is doing relative to his reputation and whether this is going to get more serious or not. To be continued, we'll know that. The last thing I want to say is I forgot this is kind of ironic. When you brought up Henry Aaron, and Aaron Judge hit the home run, now we have 2 other Aarons. Aaron Rodgers, the current quarterback of Green Bay, who to me is the best quarterback in the NFL. And to me, having watched quarterbacks for a long time, I'm just saying my way of looking at Aaron Rodgers, regardless of receivers, regardless of the running back, he's the best. Now, I don't know about that I've ever seen. From the angle of how he sort of sees everything, his quick responses, and he is a Sun-Uranus conjunction person. He's born like December 1 or something. He has the Sun conjunct Uranus. That I know. And I did look at his chart a while back. It's also why he's strange, right? He's eccentric. He didn't get the vaccine. He said, that's another thing. Instead of the COVID thing, he said, I've been vaccinated. He didn't mean that he had the COVID vaccine. Remember that whole scandal?
I do.
He said, I've been vaccinated. He had to apologize to everyone on the team.
And he played right into the national debate on COVID and whether you get vaccinated because of his name recognition, because of the spotlight that he had. And because of the money and the corporate power of all these things, we get the juxtaposition back to TUI and so on. The money that these people are being played, and the ethics and the morality, and what we're seeing a lot of, which is another thing, goes back to our sort of political or ethics and everything we've ever studied about where we stand in society. What's right? What isn't right? What is a higher truth? What are the real facts? What will the NFL commissioner do, right, or not do,
or be like when we talked about coin tosses can be heads or tails, but once in a zillion years, the coin can be on its side. You know, the commissioners, like Daniel Stern with basketball, there was a whole basketball thing that came up. The commissioner of all these different leagues. Didn't we just have in the last 24 hours the scandal again about the Olympics or soccer and women, that the whole thing was more severe sexually, right, against women athletes.
That's correct.
This truth. And, you know, we keep finding, you know, we remember the whole thing with the Penn State coach. I mean, you know, and then these things, if you have enough money or you know somebody who's in, like back to Penn State and all of that Paterno thing.
Wait, Mark, let me, I'm watching the clock. We're now 2 hours in. And
yeah, okay, we'll wrap it up. Okay, we'll wrap it up.
This is a good close. This is a good place for you to close.
Let me go back to Joe Paterno for 1 second. Wayne, from the humorous aspect, folks, during our non-recordings, Wayne will often say, are you predicting, is it a projection or whatever? I will say this, when the whole thing happened in Penn State, which is kind of a whole very creepy thing, I made an individual prediction in my mind. And the prediction was this: because Joe Paterno, as that coach, legendary coach, did not understand that one of his coaches had issues in terms of sexuality against players, it was very clear that Paterno and the whole staff would sort of like be ousted or whatever it was, and then Paterno got sick and he died. But then I realized, or I thought to myself, the whole board of trustees and the president of Penn State will have to leave, because it gets back to, you know, stuff in war. Oh, I was only following orders. I didn't know. Or did you know? And that's exactly what happened. The president of Penn State left because they couldn't survive that scandal. And what that means is that in college sports or sports, if there is something happening, like with the Olympics, with women and soccer and so on, these people out there have better watch what they're doing, like with the Brett Favre thing. You can't just go and do whatever you want, because the spotlight, you're making all this money, it's big-time sports, it's on television, it's on social media. Now, as we said the other day, people are betting on all this stuff. You've got to have to be reasonably okay ethically if you're in that limelight. You can't just do whatever you want. It gets back to the whole thing of, you know, the issues even with the pandemic or not. You know, look, people can drive cars, they can do that. But if you go 95 miles on the road and you say, well, you know, I'm free to do whatever I want until you have an accident, or if you're having too much alcohol, then you're in serious trouble. And that's basically Saturn. My final thought is Saturn are the old rules, and Uranus, Chiron, Neptune, Pluto, Sedna, Eris, all these far planets, the James Webb, everything we're learning beyond, which is so fascinating. Like you mentioned, Neptune. We're seeing Neptune in infrared technology. Neptune, as amazing as that looked, I wanted to mention that briefly, is still the blue, amazing planet in our physical vision, but James Webb has the capacity to see things in infrared. So when you folks look at the picture, you'll see this white-looking planet with rings. And that's because we're seeing, and telescopes have an ability to look with not just infrared, which is heat, basically, one vibration below the color red, but we have gamma ray telescopes. We have X-ray telescopes that are allowing us to see galaxies and stars and exoplanets in a different kind of light. It's light that's not part of the color spectrum. And I believe, and I have a subscription to Astronomy Magazine for years and years, we are going to find a merger between physics that you brought up and metaphysics and sort of cosmic energy. It's all going to link up through science, religion, and philosophy to some breathtaking changes. Any final closing things you want to share? We're at 2 hours and 6 minutes, but I've done longer podcasts.
We reached the ninth inning, and you know the scoreboard will tell the tale by the time we do this next podcast. And I want to say this, Mark. I finished this with you feeling optimistic. Sun is in Libra, and Brett Favre's solar return is coming up. He's born on the 10th. And so,
by the way, I want to thank you for everything you prepared and all the times we talk when people don't hear us. And I don't know if you're looking, I've had the chart for the sky out here in Oregon. And as we're wrapping up, Jupiter, which we've just talked about, is rising for both of us in the Gokaland section, which is just above the horizon in the east. And good old Venus, the planet of love, friendship, goodwill, in its own sign of Libra, is setting in the west with the sun. So it's a perfect time to close, and we'll go on from here, and the whole world will be looking at what are the top so many stories, tomorrow for everybody, but at least I think we've covered a whole bunch of them. Like you said, the ninth inning. We didn't get to number 13. Maybe that was significant. We'll see how many we can do next time. And everybody, please know, we're not going to just wait until January when the next GPS comes out. We're going to be doing a bunch of these out of bounds stories. So please look for several of them or many of them the rest of October, November, December, and we'll put up on the Astro scoreboard these charts, which will appear as well. All righty?
That's going to be quite an editing process.
That's quite for our man, Katja Juliet Lerner. Hello, Kat. Be careful what you wish for, putting us all together within this great triangle. Again, This was really our idea, and Katja is so kind enough to sort of be the third wheel, actually the first wheel, and Wayne is the second, I'm the third. We are a triangle of energies, and again, I feel very grateful to be able to do this with you and with Katja and to share all this with the public. So I guess we're both signing off, yes? And wishing everybody well with their astrology, their sports, their hobbies, and all the things that you're all doing. It's all part of the flow of time and the flow of space.
Okay.
All righty. Well, goodbye, everybody. We'll see you the next time. Make sure you go to Out of Bounds within GPS Astrology, our magazine, as well as on YouTube. Okay, we're signing off. We'll see you the next time. Take good care, everybody. Bye for now.
Take good care. Take good care. Bye.
Bye.